Hello and welcome back to Blow Up the Team. It's just me here today, but we're going to be doing a Jacksonville Jaguars NFL draft recap, grading, whatever you want to call it. Before the video starts, as always, I don't own any of the clips that you see in this video. Anything I don't find on ESPN, I will link the original YouTube video down in the description below, so make sure to go ahead and check that out. And of course, the grading at the end is only based on what they did in the draft. Has nothing to do with anything else that they did in the offseason, even though I will talk a little bit about what they did in the offseason, just to give some context in terms of what I'm looking at for the NFL draft. But let's go ahead and just go ahead and get into the video today. I'm actually kind of excited to talk about the Jaguars, which if you had asked me a few years ago, I would have laughed at you. Um, but they have some exciting young players on the roster, that especially DJ Chark that you see there. I picked him up in fantasy this year, and he went crazy all season. I really like him. I think he could be one of my favorite young players in the league. He just performs, man. And there's not a whole lot else I can really say to it. He just performs. He just he goes out, he does his job, and I respect it. But let's talk about the Jaguars. They were unfortunately 6-10 last season. Um, Offensively, they had their struggles. They were 20th in yards per game, 16th through the air, and 17th on the ground. So they were kind of like individually, in terms of passing and running, there wasn't necessarily a weak spot. They just didn't have a necessarily huge bright spot either. They were kind of they showed flashes of being able to perform, but overall, I would say they were pretty mediocre in the grand scheme of things offensively. But they were 26th in points per game, so that was clearly the biggest struggle. They had an issue just being able to punch the ball in, which I think giving Gardner Minshew more time to be able to kind of get acclimated to the league, as well as continuing to give him threats on the offensive side of the football, that should kind of turn around a little bit for them this season. They also signed Tyler Eifert to be the kind of tight end one there, as well as signing Chris Thompson to be running back two. There were some issues with the running game whenever Leonard Fournette was down on injury, or if it was he got in trouble. He's had his bout with being able to stay on the field for the Jaguars, but um, signing Chris Thompson gives them a solid second option, and he'll be able to kind of split the load between the two of them. And I think that gives them kind of a solid running back tandem back there. Uh, Now, I did mention that they are right down here that they also signed Mike Glennon to be backup QB, which uh, not necessarily an outstanding talent to be backup. So obviously, you're praying that Gardner Minshew stays healthy. And he's not a long-term, in my opinion, I don't think he's a long-term solution for that backup spot. You want somebody that's going to be able to step in on an injury and really perform. I don't know that he's that guy. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Moving on to the defense. This is where you saw that they started to have a little bit more struggles. They were 24th in yards per game allowed. Only 16 or like 16 through the air, which like is kind of middle of the road, like not terrible. But where they really struggled was stopping opponents on the ground. They were 28th in rushing yards allowed per game, as well as 21st in points allowed per game. So clearly the defensive side of the ball needs some help. And to kind of start working towards that, they did sign middle linebacker Joe Schobert from the Browns to start at middle linebacker. He's only 26, so he should be able to be kind of a longer-term replacement for them at that position. He does provide some solid production, and he seems to be a good pass defender. He did have 4 interceptions last year, which was second among linebackers. Um, However, he does have his moments when it seems like he struggles in the run game. He has some limited athletic abilities, which at times has come back to bite him. Um, they did also sign Cassius Marsh to start a linebacker, who's also only 27. And then they signed veteran Al Woods to start at defensive tackle. So they were kind of aware of what their weaknesses were. They were willing to step up and kind of pay what they needed to pay to be able to bring in guys that were going to be impact players for them this season. Now let's talk about the draft, which I feel like went pretty well for them. We'll obviously get more into the specific grading later, but they made 12 picks in this year's draft, and which means, I mean, they were active, which is what they needed to be. They needed to be active. The team had its fair share of struggles last season, and they needed to get young to go with, try to build around that young core that they already have. And they did just that. They went out and they made 2 first-round selections. The first one here at pick number 9 with C.J. Henderson, cornerback out of Florida. he's a bigger corner, and he's great in man-to-man coverage. He's got good speed both in combine and on tape, and you don't always see those guys like with that speed translate onto the field, but his seems to. He seems to stay with receivers easily, and he locates the ball well. And he can sometimes struggle to step up and make a tackle. Um, but in terms of finding a man-to-man defender, I think that this was a solid selection for them, especially having lost Jalen Ramsey recently and the kind of implosion that this team had. I think that this was a good selection for them. Try to find another lockdown corner for the years to come. He is slated to start a cornerback immediately this season, which I think makes sense. And I feel like he should be an impact player for them right away. Next up, we've got Kayvon Chaisson, outside linebacker from LSU. Um, he's got great quickness off the line, honestly, and he's got kind of surprising power, and it makes a difference. He needs to continue to improve his hand fighting in order to be a pass rush threat at the NFL level. But he can control blockers with his good upper body strength, and he should help improve the run defense immensely. He's technically a second-string defensive end, but I would expect him to get reps kind of early and often throughout the season as he looks to develop and they try to figure out what that defense is going to look like in a couple years. Again, they are going through they kind of blew up the team last year and are in the process of trying to put it all back together again. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with younger guys like him, but I definitely think that he has the talent to be that guy for them if they allow him to be. Next up here, we're going to talk about Laviska Shenault Jr., wide receiver out of Colorado. And I think that this was a kind of a big selection for them to get another younger wide receiver. He's got great size. He doesn't have great speed, but he can play all over the formation, which helps create better matchups. And when the ball is in his hands, he just seems to make plays happen. He's elusive in open field, and even though he's not an explosive runner, he can still rack up the yards after the catch, continuing to fight through contact and all of that. He is technically listed as a wide receiver 4, which gives them a solid young wide receiver core to pair with the solid young quarterback in Gardner Minshew, with DJ Chark being wide receiver 1 alongside Dede Westbrook and Chris Conley. So all of those guys are 27 or younger, I believe. So they got a solid young wide receiving core that they can continue to build around for years to come. And I think that that's important for them. They're giving Gardner Minshew kind of reliable targets that he knows he's going to be able to get the ball in their hands and let them go to work a little bit. And I think that all of these guys, I think that they make for a formidable wide receiving core. I know that kind of there was some question marks, at times. Obviously, Gardner Minshew going through some growing pains as he was kind of thrown into the starting lineup with the injury to Nick Foles, but I think that they've got a solid wide receiving core here, and to pair with Tyler Eifert and their kind of other talent at the tight end position, I think that they've given Gardner Minshew weapons, which is what you really needed to do. Next up, you've got Devon Hamilton, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. He's got great size, and he seems to get off blocks well. He's gotten better at being able to find the football, and even though he's a better run defender than a pass rusher, that's what they needed. They needed those guys that were going to step up in the run defense, and he seems like he could be that. He flashes good power, and he's started to show improvement as a pass rusher. Even though he's technically listed right now as a third-string defensive tackle, and he may not get a ton of playing time this season, I think that this is somebody that they'll kind of try to look to develop, and you could see him be an impact player within a couple of years, honestly, and depending on injuries, maybe even this year. But I think that he's got the talent to be able to perform, especially when it comes to run defense, and that's exactly what this team needed. They needed a guy that they can kind of, especially as they're kind of starting guys, kind of get a little tired out as the game goes on, be able to throw him in there in a run situation, and you know that he's going to plug up the holes well. That's what you needed. It is a little early, in my opinion, to go early in the third round and kind of pick up kind of like almost like a project piece. But I think that the rest of their draft went so well that that's not really going to come back to haunt them so much. Next up, Josiah Scott, cornerback out of Michigan State. He's undersized, but he's got very good top-end speed. He covers ground quickly, and he can mirror receivers underneath. And he just seems to fight hard on the outside. Now, he's not probably going to end up out there. I would say he probably projects as a slot corner. It seems to be what I was reading, is that everybody was saying that he was going to project better as a slot corner because of the fact that he's a bit undersized. But you'd like to see that kind of mentality that he's going to continue to fight on the outside, even if he is maybe a little bit in a little bit of a size mismatch. He's technically a third string cornerback, but it's always good to have good athletes on the roster. And again, um, I've said this in a lot of the videos previously. Whenever you have good athletes like that, they'll find a home somewhere. Whether it's special teams, whatever it is, they'll find a home. Whatever, there's always room on the roster for just fantastic athletes, and I think that's what they got here. Again, it's maybe a little bit early to be picking up, kind of a project piece like this, but you never know what somebody like him could turn into when you've got such a good athlete like that. And again, we're getting towards the end of the fourth, not again, but we're getting towards the end of the fourth round here, so you never really know what you're gonna get. Now I'm gonna back up a little bit and go to Ben Bartch. Now I skipped Ben Bartch primarily because I don't really know what to say about him. I skipped him at first because I was kind of trying to stay on the theme of defense. But I guess I'm going to back up here and talk about him. He's from St. John's out in Minnesota. Offensive tackle position. Now, he didn't move from tight end to left tackle. So he's kind of got experience kind of all over the place. His arm length is a bit short for tackle from what I was reading, and it looks like he could have to move to a guard position. But he does a good job of keeping his hands inside and staying on blocks in pass protection. He's shown potential to be kind of overpowering in run blocking, honestly. He's just shown the potential and he's shown that fight. And he's also shown the ability to compete at a higher level in the Senior Bowl. So I think that this is a good guy that they picked up here. He's listed technically as a both backup right guard and right tackle. But I genuinely believe he could find a home as a starter at one of those two positions within a couple years. So unlike the other two guys that we were just talking about, I don't think that he's necessarily that big of a project piece. I think it's just a matter of allowing him to kind of get up to NFL speed, and then he's kind of a plug-and-play player as you need him all over that offensive line. So I like that pick from them. Next up, we got Shaquille Quarterman, inside linebacker out of Miami. He's a very solid run defender, and he shoots gaps well. So he's kind of a backfield threat, which, again, I'm going to keep harping on it. That's what they needed. They needed those run defenders. He always plays hard, and he has a knack for kind of just being near the end of the play, which is something that you can't teach. So somebody with that kind of motor, where he's gonna chase the football with a high energy, that's something you can't teach, and I like to see that out of players. He wraps up well, and he has showed potential to have good stopping power. And he's technically backup middle linebacker, but as I mentioned earlier, the new starter Chaubert is primarily a pass defense linebacker. So I would expect Quarterman to get a lot of reps and replace Chaubert in running situations. I really feel like that's going to be kind of what they're going to do. It's going to be kind of a two linebacker system for them in that sense, where Joe will play kind of early downs where it looks like they could go through the air, but anything that is looking like it's going to be an obvious running situation, I would expect to see Quarterman in there. Next up, Daniel Thomas, safety out of Auburn. I would say he's probably projecting as like a nickel safety option. He can read the ball well, which is kind of what you're looking for out of a nickel safety. But he's not quite fast enough to really play center field effectively. He doesn't really have great ball skills. He does flash some good instincts whenever he is in underneath coverage, although I wouldn't expect him to find himself in that position that often. And he is active in run defense. He's listed as a backup free safety. I would say he's not athletically outstanding, but he does show promise that he could continue to develop and be impactful, especially in, and again, obvious passing situations. I would expect for him to find a home among that defense as they look to rebuild it. Next up, we got Colin Johnson, wide receiver out of Texas. He's just a huge target. He's listed as 6'6", which is bigger than, to be fair, quite a few tight ends. He just seems to be a natural hands catcher, and he has the ability, obviously, with that kind of size, to come down with 50-50 balls. He's kind of got an average playing speed, but again, with that size, he's just such a threat downfield because of the fact that he could go up and win those kind of one-on-one and just catch it over guys. He's not explosive in his routes, but he is kind of smooth in and out of his breaks. Now, as I was talking earlier about the young kind of wide receiving core, he's not necessarily kind of as highly touted as their second round pick, which obviously makes sense. You're finding a guy kind of mid-fifth round here. Um, but with him being kind of in that second set of wide receivers, I mean, you could definitely see him kind of get plugged in for some of the smaller guys in kind of a Hail Mary situation and a game situation where you just need to have a guy in there that's going to be able to go up and give you a chance. And I think he provides that. And I definitely think that at that size, with that ability to catch the football, uh, I think that he'll find a home pretty quickly in the offense. It's just a matter of seeing what he's going to be able to give them at an NFL speed. Now, this is the kind of this pick here, this next pick here, Jake Luton out of quarterback out of Oregon State. This one I found to be kind of interesting. It was one of the few quarterbacks that ESPN didn't have readily available tape on in the draft analysis that I've seen kind of as we've gone through some of these picks here. But from what I was reading, it just seems like he makes smart decisions. He had 28 touchdowns to 3 interceptions last season, and he just seems to be accurate when he's able to get the ball out of his hands quickly. Now he does need to work on his down the field accuracy, which is going to take time to develop. But I mentioned earlier that they kind of had a veteran quarterback that you don't really know what you're going to get a whole lot out of as your backup. I would expect him, even though he's technically listed as a third string right now behind Mike Lennon, I would expect him to become like the official backup to Gardner Minshew within a few years. I think he's got the talent to do it, and I think that even if he does continue to struggle with that down the field accuracy, he's accurate enough and he's smart enough with the football, kind of in the short and intermediate throws, that he's still going to be kind of a guy that can run that offense with some effectiveness, and that's what they're going to need, and it'll allow them to continue to stay young. The theme here throughout everything that I've seen is, with making these 12 selections in the draft, as well as most of the guys that they picked up in the offseason being fairly young, it just makes it seem like the team is aware that they're a young team with talent and that they're going to continue to build and try to improve, and that makes sense for them. I actually think that, considering everything that the Jaguars have gone through in the last couple of years, having to kind of dismantle and start over again, they've actually positioned themselves very well, in my opinion. I really like this team. Now, I am very biased because I just really love DJ Chark, especially with everything that he did for me last season in fantasy. But I do really like this team, and I think that they've done a good job of repositioning themselves. I don't think I would be kind of surprised to see them go 6-10 again this season. I think this team is better than that. Next up, we've got Tyler Davis, tight end out of Georgia Tech. He's got big hands and good speed. At 6'4", he has size and ball skills to win 50-50 balls at a tight end position. Now, we were just talking earlier about a 6'6" wide receiver. Now, that should show you just how kind of huge that's going to be for them kind of outside the numbers. But anyways, back to Tyler Davis. He has route running flashes that show that he can be an effective route runner, and he gets up the field well after the catch. He's technically a 4-string tight end, but I would say that whenever you're seeing good athletes like that, I would expect to see them find a home in special teams, and I think that that's a guy that they could have found here. Last pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars was Chris Claybrooks, cornerback out of Memphis. He's undersized, but he's got good speed. He's an ex-receiver and is still learning the position, so kind of late in the 7th round or in the 7th round to be able to get a guy who's going to, he's going to have potential upside long term. Obviously, he's going to depend on how he makes that transition. But as an ex-receiver trying to learn the cornerback position, you never know what he could turn into. It's going to take some time for him to transition, and the Jaguars, it looks like, are going to take a flyer on him and see what he can develop into. And even if that doesn't work out for him as a cornerback, he's got potential upside, and he just seems to be a great kickoff returner. He had a 94-yard return for a touchdown last season, and you're kind of looking for those explosive guys on special teams. I keep bringing it up, but anytime that you can find a guy that's going to make an impact on one of the 3 phases of the football game, special teams being one of those, I think that's a win for a pick. And I think that even in the 7th round, they managed to find value in finding somebody that, that he's got upside at corner long term, but even in the immediate, he can be that impact player, that explosive player that you're looking for in special teams. So that's all their picks. As you can see, it was kind of chock full. They were really aggressive in attacking the holes and the issues that they already knew that the team existed. They knew they had issues with run defense. They attacked run defense with a passion. They knew that they were kind of mediocre on offense, and they gave Gardner Minshew weapons to work with. So obviously, hopefully everybody can stay healthy and we'll be able to see them all perform this year. But in terms of a draft grade, specifically about the 2020 NFL draft, I really like what they did. They were aggressive. They were not afraid to trade up and get the guys that they wanted. They weren't afraid to trade in and get more picks to continue to get guys that they can try to build around for the future and try to develop into solid NFL players. And I think that they did a good job to try to recover from the kind of hole that they've been in they've been kind of digging themselves into the last year or two as they've kind of dismantled that team. So I really like what they did. I think that they were smart and they got guys with a lot of potential. They got a lot of good athletes in here, which is something that I talk about a lot. And I really like their draft. So I'm actually gonna, I'm almost probably never gonna give a team an A plus. So don't be too surprised about that. But I really do like their draft. I would say I was probably between A minus and A. They did have those couple middle, like third to fourth round picks that I felt maybe they went a little bit early on project pieces. I think that maybe they could have found a little bit more solidified talent. But I think overall they did such a good job of attacking their needs, making sure that they got roster fillers where they needed them, made sure that they attacked. They targeted guys that were going to fill in holes for them with the rushing defense as well as just finding depth along that whole defense as a whole, as that was the biggest kind of fallout of the last couple of years. And they got weapons on offense, so I think that overall, I think I'm going to give them an A. I really like their draft. I really like what they did. I think they've positioned themselves excellently for the next season. I'm excited to see what this young team is able to do, how they're able to gel. Like I mentioned earlier, I really like DJ Chark. I think he's got a lot of talent. He showed a lot of promise last year, and they've kind of built a solid wide receiver core with him at the head of it. So. I really like their draft, and I think that they've positioned themselves well. Jaguar fans out there, it's been a kind of a rough go of it, but I think that the team has done a good job to recover from the position that it was in, kind of going into this off season, or going into last season as well as this off season. Off season, I think they made a lot of smart moves, especially in the draft, and hopefully we'll be able to see that translate to the field. But I think that that's all I had to say. Matt was unable to make it today, but he will be back tomorrow with the Chicago White Sox preseason kind of grades, as well as on Friday he'll be back with the San Diego Padres. But that is it for us. Like I said, make sure to go ahead and check out that highlight video in the description down below. I obviously don't own the clips to anything. They're all owned by the NFL. Make sure to check out our social media, both our Instagram and our Twitter, our link in the description down below. And join the Discord. We're looking forward to hearing from you guys and hearing what you have to say, stuff that we can do as we kind of go forward. But that will be it for me for tonight. I will see you tomorrow when I am on with Matt and his Chicago White Sox video. But until then, peace.